broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPTA 20, Chicago's progressive talk. Welcome to the Gailey Show, the only daily LGBTQ radio news and talk show in the United States. I'm your host, John Parker, in studio with my executive producer, Jim Pounds.
Hey, y'all.
I want to acknowledge there is a lot of news happening today. And coming up after us, you're going to get the very best in progressive news with Chu's Views with Richard Chu in Chicago on WCPT and the Matt McNeil Show here in Minneapolis on AM 950 Radio. For us today, it is our weekly episode we call Unpack This For Me. And this is when an expert guest joins us to unpack a particular issue or issues affecting the LGBTQ and allied community. Today, here is what our guest is going to unpack for us. Winning and then legislating in a swing district as a Democratic Socialist, an out LGBTQ candidate, and one who is laser focused on a campaign and legislation of workers' rights, public education, and healthcare. My guest is Wisconsin State Representative Christian Phelps. He currently represents District 93 in the Wisconsin Assembly. Prior to being elected, Rep. Phelps was the Director of Digital Organizing and Communications with the Wisconsin Public Education Network. He worked in public education as a special education assistant, where he served on, as well as serving on the Board of Trustees for the Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation. He holds a master's degree in international journalism from Cardiff University. That's Cardiff, Wales, folks. And I can't not help, being journalism. His work has been featured in the Leader Telegram, Planet, the Welsh International, Wisconsin Examiner, Up North News, and WORT News 89.9 FM in Madison. Representative Phelps, welcome to the Gailey Show.
Thanks for the invitation. And John, we have so much in common. I didn't know you were going to have such a deep dive on me ready to go, but
journalism, got to have those bios ready to go. Christian, the federal government is shut down since the MAGA party is refusing to negotiate with the Democratic Party about extending subsidies for individuals and families on the Affordable Care Act. You ran on healthcare and have been working on it in the Wisconsin Assembly since your election last year. Right away, can we get your thoughts on the shutdown and its impacts on Wisconsin as it stands right now?
Yeah, the shutdown was unfortunately pretty predictable, I think, because Trump and the movement that he has sort of held, in a chokehold for so long was really upfront about the fact that they were going to do everything that they wanted to do in the service of protecting their own power, no matter how harmful or unpopular it was. And so when a deadline started approaching to keep the government open, if it meant having to think twice about the second wave of massive tax cuts they have given to the ultra wealthy in exchange for people's healthcare subsidies. Unfortunately, I think we could have seen it coming a mile away, and it's entirely on him and his party. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is the very real impacts of their willingness to hold the federal government hostage. I think that the American healthcare system in general is responsible for the fact that, for example, 2 hospitals in my region, one in my district, closed abruptly in 2024, and dozens of clinics. And then to make matters worse, what subsidies we do have available, people are going to see their premiums rise significantly in the near future unless something happens. Not to mention all the federal funding streams that keep people's livelihoods afloat here in Western Wisconsin. Food programs and basic, employment and benefits are all on the line because Trump wants that badly to protect tax breaks for billionaires.
I did not know about that hospital system closing in your district. There's a lot of concern about the big, beautiful, we call here ugly bill, and the payments that are going to be stopped and the impact that's going to have on rural hospitals and potentially having them closed down. Have you heard anything from your constituents or healthcare workers about concerns, knowing that legislation, the impacts are really going to happen in 2027, so they don't have to campaign on them in 26?
Yeah, well, good point on the impacts being felt in 2027. In a lot of ways, though, I think Wisconsin has had previews of what Trump-like governance looks like a little bit in advance. When I was, approaching the end of my teen years and becoming an adult, Scott Walker became the governor of Wisconsin and really, in my opinion, paved the way for the kind of austere, authoritarian governance that Trump ended up showing at the national level with, attacking labor unions and public funding for public services and public schools. And so in the same way, I think, the impacts on rural healthcare are a little bit easier for us to feel in Western Wisconsin because we've already seen that a lack of public oversight and treating healthcare as a human right has led to hospital closures. And, while campaigning last year, I would sometimes meet people every day who lost their jobs that were employed at the hospital in my district, the hospital my sister and I were born at back in the 90s. And so I think that we're well aware of the type of human suffering and economic hardship that can come from Trump-style governance here in Western Wisconsin. The question is, do we have a strong and unified enough response to it on the left that gives people the confidence to trust another form of governance? And I think every time we kind of capitulate or waffle on basic beliefs like healthcare is a human right, it makes people wonder, well, what would be so different if Democrats were in charge? And so that's where I see kind of my role right now, is to say it should be a lot different if we're in charge, and we should have a blueprint for demonstrating that to our constituents.
Mm-hmm. Another big headline happening in the news is the No Kings protest that happened this past weekend. I've seen various numbers of 7 to 8 million people across the country were participating in it. Curious about your thoughts, and I don't know if you were actually in your district when it happened, but what are you hearing from folks in your district regarding to this idea of, please, no kings in this country?
Yeah, I was here. The latest estimates I heard were 6,000 to 7,000 people here in Eau Claire. It was a big demonstration, the second of its kind in Eau Claire. We had a No Kings protest in June with almost the same numbers as well. What I'm hearing is that people just want their government to reflect the actual values of the community. And so we're no stranger to the fact that the state and federal governments have not always reflected the values of our community, but it's so in your face right now that people can see public dollars and resources being used to pay rich guys, keep Trump and his friends out of criminal trouble, pay his friends in Argentina, give weapons overseas to genocidal regimes, and not to invest in Western Wisconsin so that we can actually see the labor that and the love that we put into our community reflected in actual economic justice. I think Trump is so in your face about his authoritarian power grabs that we're only going to see more and more awareness and energy around pushing back against it. And last weekend was certainly an example of that.
Mm-hmm. I'm so fascinated about your candidacy and your representation of your district in Wisconsin Assembly, because since the election last year in 2024, there have been a significant number of pollsters, Democratic think tanks, a certain governor, popular, who say you, sir, shouldn't exist. A Democratic Socialist, a gay, and economic kitchen table issues, those things can't go together. And yet here you are doing it, winning and legislating in a swing district in one of the most heavily contested swing states in the country. Tell me, how are you putting all of that together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are people a lot less connected to me in my local community that are much more concerned about labels and branding than I am or than my neighbors are. I think what people are looking for in the state legislature or in elected officials is an authentic representation of who they're going to get, and a commitment to communicate openly and honestly about that. So, I was an advocate for a long time before I decided to run for this office, and I wasn't planning on running for office ever. But my district was held by a Republican for 14 years before I won it last year. And so, like I said, I was a public school family member and public school high school student. when Scott Walker became the governor and took an axe to teachers' unions and public school funding. I organized high school walkouts against him. I was a public special education paraprofessional and teachers union member, and really saw the impact of his movement when I worked in the public schools directly with the kids that need the most and are getting so little. I was a journalist, and I was kind of a professional advocate in a way with Wisconsin Public Education Network, helping school board members and parents advocate for what the kids in their community really need most. And I just believe that the public sector and public schools are foundational to everything else that we want. If we want a community where our neighbors are not too poor to live, and where we and our neighbors can actually thrive and see the impact of the work and the love that we put into our community, we need public systems and public schools. And so when we got more competitive legislative maps last year, when the Wisconsin State Supreme Court struck down the state level Republican gerrymander, and there were so many more competitive districts, I was drawn into a different district than the one I used to live in fact. It was basically a matter of just deciding that we were going to regret missing that opportunity for what it was when we have a chance to put so many new people into the legislature at once. We don't want to miss the opportunity to put people that have a governance plan and an advocacy background into those seats. And so I am very progressive. I'm a member of the Legislative Socialist Caucus. But when I talk to people, I just say, I know you. I believe in the same values that have guided our community for a long time. And here's my governance plan.
I have a lot more questions for Representative Phelps. I have to take in a quick break here. Before we do, I want to share about our travel partner, Travel Marquette. And the reason why is that Marquette, Michigan is a very special place for me. I've been going there for the past 10 years. And part of the reason why I love it is that I don't have to worry about traveling while queer in Marquette. It is a blue city and a reliably blue county and a university town with a very active pride organization. And I just got back from there this past weekend, where I had an opportunity to just disconnect, recenter, refill my cup, as they say. And if you want to do the same, you can go to travelmarquette.com to begin your adventure, travelmarquette.com, and also reach out to me on Blue Sky, because I have a lot of recommendations of what you can do while you're there. You are listening to The Gailey Show on AM 950 KTNF and WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. More after this break. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I'm John Parker, in studio with my executive producer, Jim Pounds. This is our weekly episode we call Unpack This For Me, where we sit down with an expert guest to take a deep dive into issues facing the LGBTQ and allied community. My guest today is Wisconsin State Representative Christian Phelps. Christian, public education, big platform for you. You were saying that you were organizing walkouts when you were still in high school in protest of Act 10. I was working in higher education and at St. Paul College in the Twin Cities here. And after it happened, the percentage of educators from Wisconsin applying for jobs here, both at the college I was working at and just throughout the Twin Cities, just skyrocketed as they were trying to come to a place that valued education, but gave them a wage and benefits, and they could be part of a union again. Can you unpack for us how you are approaching now as a legislator, rebuilding Wisconsin's public education system and undoing all of the pain that Act 10 caused?
It's a monumental project, unfortunately. And I think we have to be really honest about how successful the far right was in its effort to demolish public education in Wisconsin. The way that I look at rebuilding it is by being honest with people about why it was the target of Scott Walker and his allies' attacks. Public education, public schools are, at their best, they are a person's first laboratory for democracy. They are one of the only institutions that bring people together every day from wildly different backgrounds and kind of demand a type of living and working and learning together that, if we did it on the broadest scale, would make a much healthier and more successful society for everybody. And also public sector unions and teachers unions in particular were very politically powerful before Scott Walker had to take their eye off the ball the way that he did so successfully. And folks that opposed public education had a much harder time winning elections in Wisconsin when teachers unions had the resources and flexibility to mobilize their members to be politically engaged. And so Scott Walker was smart to identify them as the target of his ire and say, no more automatic recertification and no more collective bargaining. If you want to exist as a teachers union in Wisconsin now, you have to spend a lot of hours and time just continuing to exist and not politically advocating, not bargaining for good wages and benefits. And so people need to understand that it was a political project that he undertook. And a lot of what we're seeing today is because he was so successful in his efforts to do that. But people can organize, and unions are one of the best organizing spaces ever. And so after over a decade of that reality, they are crawling back. They do continue to exist. And our public schools in general continue to exist because even in a state where it takes hundreds of school referendums per election cycle just to keep lights on and operations going in our school districts, Wisconsin voters have consistently passed those at high rates, meaning they're willing to raise their own taxes because the state doesn't invest in their public schools, because that's how badly they want them to continue to exist. So what I see is an opportunity to capitalize on all of that organizing. I think this so-called urban-rural divide doesn't actually exist in the way that people claim it does. When I go into the rural parts of my district, which is about almost half of my constituents are rural, and the other half live in the city of Eau Claire. When I say, I want to keep your public school open, I want to stop wasting your tax dollars on private, unaccountable schools that you can't even see here in rural Wisconsin, and I want to make sure that your kids and your neighbors' kids have the opportunity to thrive in a public school environment, I have a hard time finding people that categorically disagree with that. Maybe we don't agree on everything about the method, but I think it's a really good way to break down that urban-rural divide and build some political power around saving public schools. And also, we just need to put public school advocates in charge of the government. It's been a really long time since Democrats had a majority in the Wisconsin legislature. And when we get that majority next year, we are going to use it to fix our school funding formula, stop raising people's property taxes, which is a very regressive tax system, impose fair taxes on the very wealthy, and invest in kids for what they're worth, which in my opinion is the most valuable resource and investment that we could possibly make. So we have to articulate that plan. We have to give Democrats the majority in the legislature, and we have to approach our constituents in urban and rural Wisconsin with the kind of empathy and patience that it takes to explain the political project that we have before us, because I think that people are going to be on board with it when they have that opportunity.
We're talking with Wisconsin State Representative Christian Phelps, who represents the 93rd District, a swing district in the Wisconsin Assembly. Christian, I mean, as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing there's a reason why former educators are getting elected in the state of Wisconsin. And that, I think, speaks to the legacy of Act 10. I mean, your Governor Evers, who is now retiring after, a second term, former educator, yourself, former educator. I think that it speaks to the legacy of harm that Act 10 had across the state. Jim is actually a resident of Wisconsin, just a little bit north. We're in 50.
I'm in
75,
72. Which is northwest, southeast Burnett County. So you talked about authentic representation. Duke Tucker, who's our representative up there, goes around in a Pendleton shirt and says, I'm a farmer. And of course, he's an IT professional. If you look up his actual bio, he's a phony. He's wearing a costume to pretend to be a farmer like all you farmers, and he's an IT guy. So I appreciate that you're who you say you are. That goes a long way with me. So the thing that I'm also very proud of is the fact that one of the falsehoods expressed by Republicans in the state is that, oh, well, the only Democrats live in Milwaukee and Madison. Well, baloney. and Eau Claire was always, a swing district, like you say, John. And the fact that you're there and doing so well and standing up so individually for yourself and that area is just fantastic. I'm really proud of you.
Thanks for saying that. That's kind of one of my pieces of life work, is to dispel the myth that there's no such thing as a rural progressive or progressive outside of the major cities or the coasts of the U.S. I mean, I've always been frustrated by what doesn't seem to be any evidence behind the claims that are often perpetuated about, what flies there won't fly anywhere else. I meet a lot of like-minded people in my community, and people that might not agree with me on everything, but agree with me on the basic values. And that's a pretty strong starting point.
We are talking with Wisconsin State Representative Christian Phelps, who represents the 93rd District in the Assembly. I have to fit in another break here. We've still got lots to unpack with Christian when we come back. And with corporate media bending the knee to MAGA, support for independent news and talk is more important than ever. Listen to the advisors and sponsors in our break that's happening right now on WCPT and AM 950. Give them a shout out on social media, and even better, do some business with them. You are listening to AM 950 KTNF and WCPT 820. More after this break. Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF and WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome back to the Gailey Show. I am John Parker. It is 33 minutes after the hour. It is our weekly Unpack This For Me episode, when an expert guest joins us for the hour to unpack a particular issue or issues affecting the LGBTQ and allied community. Today, our guest is unpacking for us winning and then legislating in a swing district as a Democratic Socialist, an LGBTQ candidate, and a legislator with a laser-focused agenda on workers' rights, public education, and healthcare. Our guest is Wisconsin State Representative Christian Phelps, who represents the 93rd District in the Wisconsin Assembly. Christian, part of democracy is having good maps. And Wisconsin is coming out of a map nightmare as the country nationally, Congress is going into a map nightmare. Can you talk about having fair maps? And because you are, a beneficiary of having a map that was competitive and not gerrymandered. And then look, democracy worked in that situation. Talk to us about the maps in Wisconsin.
Yeah, we had a long time of manufactured one-party rule in the state legislature in Wisconsin. After Scott Walker defunded public schools and took an axe to public sector unions, I think it dawned on him that wasn't a terribly popular thing to do. And so rather than defending it and having his party candidates defend it in their legislative races, they just drew their own maps to make sure that they could pick their voters instead of letting voters pick them or not. And I think there are some really obvious outcomes of gerrymandering, just mathematically who ends up filling the legislature, and some less tangible ones that we know really well in Wisconsin. One of those is that it allows misinformation and disinformation to spread faster, because when elected officials and candidates do not have to win over a competitive cross-section of their neighbors in order to get elected, they don't really have to explain or tell the truth unless out of the goodness of their own hearts. I have a lot of constituents who, if we're talking about education, in rural Wisconsin, for example, never knew that they were losing their tax dollars to private unaccountable schools through Wisconsin's voucher programs. And it isn't their fault. It's because they haven't had representatives that have had to explain that and defend it to them before. And another one is the loss of morale. Wisconsin is a famously purple state, as I know Minnesota is, but I think Wisconsin more so, and for a longer time has been a competitive purple state. And it's like true purple. Like the city of Eau Claire, for example, is probably 60 to 65% Democratic voters. The rural area around it, maybe 60% Republican voters. That means a large number of people make up the minority voting population in either one. And under gerrymandering, for that long, it was very difficult for progressive and Democratic voters in rural Wisconsin to maintain hope that they would actually be heard at the ballot box, because they weren't being. And so it takes a lot of organizing and advocacy to keep people engaged and maintain a little sense of hope and power building opportunity when they keep voting and voting and voting, and nothing ever changes in a way that reflects their opinions and values in the legislature. So it's incredibly important for democracy that we outlaw gerrymandering as quickly as possible at the state and federal levels, because not only do they kind of manufacture the makeup of a legislative body, but they really beat down people's ability and willingness to engage in democracy. And of course, that has even longer lasting impacts on the democratic process.
Well, in Wisconsin, it was famous for nonsense like the requiring you to show your driver's license before you vote. I mean, if anybody, I was an election judge in Minnesota for a couple of seasons. If you understand the way that process works, you sign your signature, you're promising, you're swearing that I'm this person that I'm saying I am. It doesn't require you to have an ID to do that. If you've broken the law and misrepresented yourself, they will find that eventually, and you will be prosecuted for it. So this whole show your ID thing is meant to keep people who don't have an ID or have trouble getting an ID from voting. It's a voter suppression. And all of that was dishonestly represented and made voting, an even harder thing to encourage people to do. It's so anti-democratic. It makes me furious. Sorry. But,
there are a lot of different things that Wisconsin Republican leaders have done to suppress voters and make it harder to vote. And I'm an advocate and an activist, and I believe that voting is not the only thing that leads to real justice and liberation. But to anybody who's skeptical about whether it's an important part of it, if it didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying this hard to stop us from voting. So clearly, they're afraid of a critical mass of voters.
Exactly.
To that, I have a question. Obviously, the gerrymandering in Missouri now and Texas and all of these other states are going to be bad. We're getting rid of Democratic districts. But I don't want to be saying I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, but I have a sense that even if they do this, there is a groundswell of anger here. And I believe that your district is in or next to Representative Van Orden's district, and he is one of the most vulnerable people in Congress right now. And do you have a sense that, I don't want to make silver lining and be like, Pollyannish about this, but I'm kind of feeling like even if they gerrymander the maps, there's so much anger right now that we may see Republican candidates just swept out of office no matter how they do the maps. Do you have a sense of that in Western Wisconsin, if I'm sort of heading in the right direction with that analysis?
Yeah, a couple things I would say to that. I am in Congressman Van Orden's district, and our congressional maps are actually still gerrymandered in Wisconsin. There hasn't been a lawsuit that struck those down yet. So the third CD that I live in is actually probably the only one that's kind of 50-50 competitive in the entire state right now. And there is definitely an opportunity that must be taken to get rid of him next year. I think you're right. There's clearly energy that is extremely offended and upset with the Trump party and the way that they've been governing. Masked federal agents swooping into their communities, kidnapping people that need due process. If no one has due process, then you don't have due process, and people are starting to understand that. Right. And defunding public systems that people rely on for healthcare, education, food, and housing, which are all human rights. There's an important component of making that happen, though, which is offering a real alternative. And so I would caution against complacency or assumptions that folks will simply vote for Democrats because they aren't Republicans. I think we've tried that playbook a lot with mixed and usually negative results. We need to offer a steadfast belief that healthcare, housing, food, and education are human rights, that if you live here, you are afforded those things, that you don't deserve to be too poor to live, and a real governance plan that treats them like human rights. And that even requires, in my opinion, not keeping everybody happy. It does not bother me if Trump and his ilk and billionaires don't like me, because a much larger percentage of people in my neck of the woods are going to understand that we need to draw some lines in the sand. And if we do that, I think you're right. I think that they can try to undermine democracy all they want, but people's sentiments are what they are, and they want to see investments in their community that Trump refuses to make, and that Republicans here in Wisconsin have refused to make.
I mean, when I see state elections in Iowa, where Democratic legislators are winning, where Trump won, by double digits, and now they're winning by double digits, I just have to go, there may be something happening here that we're not fully capturing in polls. But I do, what you're talking about, I do want to, about the agenda. You recently penned a piece in Up North News talking about how you are proudly Democratic Socialist. Tell us more about that, and why, there's a lot of folks saying, don't call yourself a socialist and run away from it. And it's just, you're just going into MAGA talking points. You had some really great counterpoints in your article. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, thanks for reading it. I thought there were good points in there too.
Jim found it, and then he sent it to me immediately, and I was like, oh, we are asking about this.
Yeah. So in my opinion, labels are always going to be interpreted differently by everybody. And so there are people who are afraid of that label, and there are people who aren't. I point out in that article that Democrat is a label too. One that I am a member of the Democratic Party, and I run as a Democrat, and I am an Assembly Democrat. Recent polls have shown that the Democratic Party has an approval rating in the 25 to 35% range, I think. And so anytime you embrace a label, you're going to have to explain to your constituents and voters what it means to you. I caucus with the Wisconsin Legislative Socialist Caucus, partly because the other three members of that caucus and I have worked together for a long time on the same things. And I admire them, and I believe that they can hold me accountable, and largely as a shared accountability metric. So I believe that your political party is important. It drives political thought. It makes sure that we have power building and get out the vote and governance once we're in power. But it isn't necessarily your only political home. And so the Wisconsin Legislative Socialist Caucus holds me accountable to the values that I ran on. And it kind of, to me, it's an acknowledgement that I'm not some kind of morally superior superhuman that can never be corrupted by fundraising metrics or partisan politics or power. And I want this mechanism to make sure that I'm remembering that everything I do isn't about me in this role. It's about a movement that may or may not even be achieved in the course of my life. It's about constantly evaluating every decision before us through the lens of whether it moves us closer to treating healthcare, housing, food, and education as human rights or not, and making a decision based on that and that alone. And if it is a politically inconvenient decision, we will make that decision anyway, and then we'll come up with a strategy to message around it, organize around it, build power around it, and give voters an opportunity to hold us accountable for it. It's an acknowledgement that all public resources and governance should be evaluated through that lens before it's evaluated through partisan politics or anything else. And I'm very grateful for Representatives Clancy, Hung, and Madison, who are good friends of mine and who share that belief system with me, that we have to do something about the capitalist economic system we live in, because if it were working, people wouldn't be struggling so badly.
Zohran Mamdani is the highest profile Democratic Socialist right now, and the boogeyman of a lot of third-way Democrats who say that he will not play in middle America. What is your response to them?
I invite them to my district to have the conversations that I have. I just think if people had the kind of time to hand wring over labels and associations or lack thereof with candidates for mayor of New York, I would be hearing about it. But what I hear about is that people are extremely concerned about cuts to SNAP and Medicaid and public schools. They are concerned about the ballooning homelessness crisis in Eau Claire and the surrounding area. And they're sick of seeing greed and corruption get in the way of fixing those problems when we actually do have solutions on the table and we have enough resources to put those solutions into action if we just have the political will. Those are the conversations that I have. And so if people's main concern were whether I'm similar to or different from Zoran Mamdani, I think they would bring that up first. But that has never come up other than from people who are big fans of the kind of new brand of democratic politics that he's putting forward and are hoping to see more of it, frankly.
We are talking with Wisconsin State Representative Christian Phelps, represents the 93rd District in the Wisconsin Assembly. I have to fit in another break here, but there's still a lot to happen on the Gailey Show. I want to tell folks that we are also doing interviews with the Minneapolis mayoral candidates, and we have curated a playlist on YouTube with all of our interviews thus far from those from here on the Gailey Show. And we have one more that we're going to be doing next Wednesday with Minnesota State Senator Omar Fateh. So be sure to tune in to those. We talk specifically about LGBTQ issues. We're the only one on the radio covering this race from a queer perspective. So be sure to go to youtube.com/@thegailey-show to watch that full playlist. And otherwise, you can find those episodes individually on our websites, am950radio.com, heartlandsignal.com, or you can stream them everywhere you get your podcasts. One last break, still lots to get to here on The Gailey Show. Welcome back to the Gailey Show. I'm John Parker. We are coming up on the top of the hour. I am joined by both my executive producer, Jim Pounds, and Wisconsin State Representative Christian Phelps, who represents the 93rd District in the Wisconsin Assembly. I can't believe this hour is almost up. We're coming up on the top of the hour. And Christian, schools on which you run so splendidly and vociferously on, schools are the ground zero for Republican and MAGA attacks on LGBTQ kids. And I would be remiss not to ask you about how you are trying, as you're rebuilding and working to rebuild the Wisconsin public school system after decades of MAGA rule. How do you see supporting LGBTQ kids in the public education system there?
I mean, I see the fight for public education and the fight for LGBTQ plus freedom as the same fight. I think we have to be honest as public school advocates and educators that our public schools, even before they started being attacked by Scott Walker and his ilk, were not perfect and are not perfect and have not always led to a sense of welcoming and belonging for LGBTQ youth or families. But privatizing the system or making it less welcoming is certainly not a solution. And in the same vein, when you think about the role of a public system and using public resources to support a community, LGBTQ identities are unique. They are often not shared with one's biological family. And of course, as members of the community ourselves, I'm sure that we all have personal experience with friends and loved ones who have not felt supported by their biological family in their own lives and identities. And when there is a strong and robust public system in place, that's one of the most concrete and tangible times that somebody needs that system. When they are feeling alone and they're a young person and they're at risk of isolating further. A public system that treats non-discrimination seriously will step in to provide that support as somebody comes to understand their identity and the sense of safety. And I think we also probably all know people who would say that their lives were saved by a great teacher. And so I think these fights are very interconnected to me. I don't see social and economic policy as distinct things, because we have members of our community who are particularly likely to face youth homelessness and depression and addiction and worse, because our identities continue to be othered, including by political leaders, and people can feel the impact of that rhetoric. And so we need to invest harder, more, and draw more of a line in the sand around, you're not going to defund the public systems that are there for our community members when they need them most.
Jim, I know you have some questions for Christian.
Well, one thing I'm curious about, I look at you and I see the future, and maybe that's something that's I'm making a symbol out of you, and I know you're not a symbol. I know you're a person, and I respect you as an individual. But I think, and John, you're saying it too, this is the kind of person who can simplify what everybody else is trying to make complicated. You can personalize it. You have youth and optimism, that just is a function of your age and all of that. But you don't come from San Francisco or some sort of stereotypical place of gayness. You come from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And so you're these combination of things that I think are really powerful and give me optimism. Something that John maybe isn't aware of, we're still fighting the battle in the legislature where Republicans control both houses. So there's a lot that we can't do until 2026, when we darn well better win one of those two houses. But do you have a priority when that moment comes in the Assembly or the State Senate where you can see a legislative opportunity? Do you have a particular priority?
It's hard to separate any from any others, for me, because they are all connected, and the deprivation of any one right or freedom is the deprivation of all of them in a way. But I think I know what my role is how I would answer that question. And I come with a very specific background in messaging and communications and community organizing and policy-wise on public education. And so I want to see a Democratic trifecta in January 2027 that has a plan in place to significantly reinvest in public schools, strengthen non-discrimination standards, target resources where they're needed most, which is special education, English language learners, and students facing poverty, and stop wasting people's public dollars on private schools, which in Wisconsin are allowed to discriminate against students and families. To be very clear, it is legal for them to discriminate against students and families, even if they're receiving your taxpayer dollars. Right. And so I don't personally appreciate it when elected officials pretend to be experts in things they aren't experts in. So I care just as much about the environment and healthcare and labor rights and legalizing cannabis and many other things as I do about public education. And I'm going to listen to the experts on those issues so that we have a blueprint for that too. I'm going to offer a blueprint from my background on reinvesting in public education and communicating that out to our constituencies, urban and rural alike.
I look forward to hearing more about the agenda. Hopefully, Christian, you'll be back here on the Gailey Show as we get closer to 2026 election and that hopeful Democratic trifecta in Wisconsin in 2027. You can connect with Representative Phelps on Instagram. He is at CS_Phelps. You can also search for him on Facebook. And if you Google Christian Phelps Gov, Wisconsin Gov, you can find his legislative website. I'd give the link. We're going to put it in our show notes and website, but to say it right now, it's a lot. Christian, thank you for joining us here today on The Gailey Show.
Thanks so much. It's been really fun.
All right, folks, up next on WCPT 820 is Choose Views with Richard Chu. On AM 950, it is the Matt McNeil Show. Stay tuned after that for Native Roots Radio, and then step into the unknown with Greg Bakken on Ghost Box Radio. And until this time, tomorrow, keep it queer, America.
Keep it queer.